Suraj, you mentioned to me how you think philanthropy really needs to be tied into everything you do. And I suppose this is one example, right? You have the hotels, you see that there's excess food. How can we use that? How can we give back? Can you give us some other examples of the way that you have sort of tied philanthropy to the things that you do or that the company does?
Yeah, no, definitely. One thing, and Karen, I know we discussed this a few days ago, is that Reetu, being the co-chair of our family foundation, being the chairwoman of our family company, she has always made sure that we ground all new discussions, any new projects, into how do we give back. And what's really amazing is, Reetu and I are very blessed. We are in a family where everyone is really aligned on the philanthropy side, right? Everyone wants to give back. And honestly, I'm very lucky because working with Reetu, she will always bring every conversation back to, okay, let's zoom out and see how we can kind of figure out a way to make a difference. And that is what allows us to really make sure we're doubling down on any of those given things. One example I can give is Reetu and I launched our venture capital fund called Rogue Insight Capital. We launched it 5 years ago. And we basically decided that we wanted to diversify the family. So financially, we wanted to diversify the family company. We wanted to start doing some new things, get less exposure to real estate, support Canadian entrepreneurs, all that kind of thing. But more importantly, we were seeing a big gap in the market. We were seeing that companies that were diverse, so female founded, immigrant founded, or founded by diverse ethnic minorities, and companies that were very intentional about making a social impact back in 2017, and unfortunately still now, they struggle, right? They don't raise the same funding, they don't get the same spotlight. And a big reason is, there's a lot of biases in the system against diverse founders. And there's also this kind of mentality that's now changing, where if a company says, hey, we're a socially impactful company, there's an automatic assumption of you're sacrificing profit, which is not the case. So Reetu and I looked at it and said, okay, we can create a company that's going to do very well financially, that has a social and ethical obligation to give back, right? It's going to support founders that deserve it. It's going to support companies that are actually making the world better. And we'll be able to demonstrate to the world that when you do those social and ethical things, you actually do much better financially. So it kind of completes the circle. And in our minds, we were thinking, if we do this, we can sort of show the industry that there's a big financial blind spot here, because the social and ethical blind spots, they've been there for life, right? Everyone knows these are problems, but no one's really addressing them the right way. So we kind of figured if we can prove to people that they're also affecting their own pocketbooks, then hopefully we get more people on board, because there's a lot of ways, Karen, like you said, where you can tie impact, tie philanthropy into your everyday business. It doesn't always need to be just sort of one-off donations. And one of those ways is supporting companies that have a strong mission statement, that are trying to make the world better while they build out a profitable business model.
And, we are so, or at least I am so focused on trying to help endowments to really unlock that capital and use it for the greater good. And would you just mind sharing where the name Rogue came from?
Yeah, sure. I would be happy to. So Reetu and I we've been best friends since I was 2 years old. And we always knew that we were going to work together one day. Actually, when I was very, very young, we always talked about it, right? I was 5 or 6 years old. We always talked about how one day when we're both grown-ups, we're going to work together and we're going to do something together and we're going to start something. And obviously we were kids, so we didn't know what that meant, but we always knew it was something entrepreneurial. So when I was 13 or 14 years old, Reetu and I were talking about this concept of doing a new business. But we also knew that our family company was in real estate. And going back to my earlier comments about status quo, often within our family company specifically, there was more, we could just feel there was a little more resistance to the idea of kind of going away from the industry we knew, right? Real estate was going very well. My parents were absolutely crushing it in that industry. So we knew it was harder to convince them to kind of put resources somewhere else, even though Reetu and I were passionate about it and knew it would do well. So back then, when I was 13 or 14, Reetu actually got us these big hoodies made that said "Go Rogue." And she said, one day we're going to go rogue from the family company and we're going to do something new. And we're going to do something that's innovative. And we didn't know what that meant, but it kind of became our inside joke. We always kind of a few times a year, we always talk about the concept of Rogue. And one day we're going to do this. Fast forward to when I was 27 years old, and I just finished my MBA from Columbia, and I'm looking at all these different business ideas I wanted to work on, different startups I'd like to work on, but nothing felt right. Nothing felt like this is the one thing I wanted to sort of dedicate my life to. I wanted to be able to support all of these different ideas. So I was in New York City. I called Reetu, like I always do. I have a problem, and we discussed it. And she said, "Yeah, I think it's finally time we do Rogue. We've talked about this for 15 years. What if we do it?" So we had a conversation. We hashed out what it would look like, and landed on sort of this diversity and impact focused angel investor venture capital firm. And that since has grown to become our family office. But that's sort of the origin story of Rogue Insight Capital.
I love it. That's adorable. And, you know, I so agree that philanthropy is not just about making grants, right? Or it's not just about making donations to organizations, right? It's also about investing in organizations. And I love the way that you've really tied philanthropy to many different types of business ventures. Um, just going back to the foundation for a minute, though, there were some, I think, pain points that you had mentioned, especially when COVID hit and you weren't really able to meet with people, right? And there was no more in-person interaction. And maybe, Reetu, can you sort of describe for us how you were able to maybe overcome that and the steps that you took during that period?
Sure. So this is really interesting because we launched the foundation during COVID. For me, maybe I'm old school, but I like to meet people. I like to meet people in person. And, you know, I'm still the person that takes handwritten notes. I don't know what it is. I know a lot of people like to do video calls and stuff. And for me, I love to meet people in person. So we launched a foundation and we're meeting with different organizations thinking, you know, who are we going to partner with and how do we give back and what's going to match our mandate. And with a few companies that we're meeting, we realized, Suraj and I realized right away that, you know, we have to figure out a way that we can be comfortable over Zoom and be comfortable knowing that, okay, we're going to donate, you know, a large sum of money and just hope that it goes from the person that we're talking to the content that we would like to go to and make sure that all of it is smooth. And we definitely had, you know, there's so many risks with that. And I mean, it's not to say that if you met them in person, it would be any different. And I think that's what we kind of learned along the way is that if you ask the right questions, and even if it means you have to have 15 phone calls, as long as you kind of mark off the list of, okay, these are the questions, these are my concerns, these are the risks. What Suraj and I found was that, you know, we would sit together and say, okay, what are we worried about and what are we concerned about? And how can we, as you said, Karen, how can we overcome it? Honestly, with multiple conversations, that's how we became comfortable. In terms of other things, I know we mentioned this too earlier, that when we were shipping, we wanted to help COVID in India. So we decided to ship oxygen concentrators over to India. Now, this is completely out of our realm of business. You know, we're hotels, real estate, VC, and yes, philanthropy, but we had no way of kind of sourcing concentrators. And this was at a time when there was a huge shortage globally. So we actually, through our hotel contacts, somehow found a company in the US where we would then have to ship it to Canada because they wouldn't ship it to India for us because of legalities. We had to ship it from here to India. We couldn't even get a cargo plane, so we had to send it on Emirates, which is a really expensive airline. We had to send these concentrators on Emirates to India. And once it got to India, once it got to the tarmac, we were hearing that the situation was so bad in India that people, if there was concentrators or any, you know, any kind of supplies coming to the tarmac, they're being stolen kind of right off the tarmac. So we had to get government involved to make sure that as soon as it landed, you know, it passed through and it went to the centers. But my family and I were all worried. You know, we were literally, I was, the night that we were shipping it, I just kept basically just staring at my WhatsApp app and just waiting for that update to say, okay, did it land? Is it with the government now? Is it now in the COVID centers where we were planning to put it in Punjab? But it was just really difficult. And I think for that case specifically, we brought on anybody that we thought we could help. So if there was someone, and we honestly, our team at Easton's has been amazing. So a lot of our GMs, they jumped in and said, okay, we don't know how to ship anything, but we're going to help you. And that's exactly what we needed. So we just kind of put it out there that we're doing something for philanthropy. Is there anyone that wants to help? And what I think is beautiful is that what I've seen in the past 2 years, that anytime I put it out there and, you know, I've asked family or friends or the company, we're doing this for philanthropy. Would you like to help? So many people volunteered. And even if they didn't know anything about the topic, you know, great minds, everyone came together and we were able to find solutions.
And would you say if you know, for people that are trying to sort of start out and find their way, is that sort of community building, that collaboration, do you think that's a critical point to help them sort of in their first steps?
You know what? I think the first step, if you're looking to get into philanthropy, is just try to understand what it is that you would like to achieve. And Karen, you said it beautifully. You said that there's no right or wrong. It can be anything. Today I want to help children. I also want to help tigers in India, and that's really random and doesn't follow our mandate, but it's just something that my heart kind of wants to do. So I would say, as a first step, that if there is that little inkling that you want to give back, as Suraj mentioned, do some research and see if there's any organizations that fit what you would like to do. And then in terms of community, yes, always ask, because I feel like philanthropy is also something that not a lot of people talk about. And I feel like if you even reached out to your own network of family and friends, of uncles, of cousins, they might have even done exactly what you've done. And Suraj and I have found that more often than not, as we met people, they would say, oh yeah, I worked with that organization, I'll make this introduction. And we were shocked. And I think that most people that do philanthropy, they're doing it from their heart. So you don't hear about it. You don't hear about it in the news. People aren't bragging about it. So I would say 100% that community is important. And sometimes it doesn't mean you have to have a huge network. It just means, go to anyone that you know and just put it out there to say, this is what I would like to do. What do you think? Do you know anybody? And I know, Suraj, you also have a lot to say on networking. So I'd love for you to jump in here.
No, I totally agree. I mean, on Reetu's earlier point on diligence, I think that's kind of what it all comes down to, right? It's a lot easier to green light working with a new organization if there's someone that you know and trust that has worked with them and continues to work with them, because it means that someone along the line has kind of already vetted it for the first time and realized they're doing good work. It's always more difficult to vet an organization where it's just that one-way dialogue. And as Reetu mentioned, you just need to do a lot of diligence, have a lot of phone calls, get yourself comfortable, and then you can hit a point where you can start working with them and then hopefully scale it. But yeah, I know for us, any organization we worked with, when we were able to get a warm introduction, or we knew someone that had worked with them and had a great experience, or were really able to speak to the impacts that the team was driving, and honestly, more important for Reetu and I, really able to speak to the passion of the people running the organization, saying like, they really want to make this change, they really want to make this difference. It was hugely helpful in being able to make that kind of green light decision on new organizations to work with.
So I think some of the tenets that the two of you are actually talking about really are around trust-based philanthropy. And we are seeing a big trend and uptick in funders really embracing this concept of trust, of learning more about their grantee partners, of listening more to their grantee partners. It doesn't take away from the fact that you want your grantee partners to be held accountable, or you want to be able to measure the work that your grantee partners are doing. But I think that conversation and sort of that leap of faith in trusting the people, whether you didn't have the opportunity to meet them in person or you did, I think that's a huge component. In the work that the foundation is going to do going forward, what does that look like?
Great question. So our mandate, my dad, as I had mentioned before, he did a lot of work in India in healthcare. So it was a lot of eye camps. He did some sanitation projects for school. He also did disaster relief for Gujarat when the earthquake had hit many years ago. So when I decided to take it over, what I wanted to do was to focus on education and empowerment. So what we try to do is whatever projects we're looking at, we're kind of trying to make sure that it sort of fits those two buckets. But as I said, I also want to save the tigers, that doesn't really fit into either bucket. But I do think we also want to make sure that we're following the UN sustainable goals. So that's sort of another caveat to that. So if it doesn't really fall under empowerment and education, as long as it's, helping the world and following the SDGs, we will probably greenlight it. One of the projects that I'm really excited about that's actually in progress now. We're working in Egypt. We're working with the Suraj Foundation, and what we're doing. So I really wanted to help women who are starting businesses. The problem with microfinance that I found was that there are problems as you go down the world of microfinance. And what I was noticing is that there's a lot of women that was great. They did great with microfinance, but then something would happen. Maybe they needed childcare relief. Maybe they needed healthcare relief. And now the microfinance isn't helping them, and they would eventually be thrown back into poverty. And when I talked to Suraj about this, I said, this doesn't make sense to me. And if we're going to help, I want to solve the problem. I don't want to solve it temporarily, and then years from now these women could be thrown back into poverty. So when I approached the Suraj Foundation with this, they actually did a lot of studies and a lot of research, and what they came up with was sort of a microfinance but a holistic program. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be helping women that already have businesses. We're going to help them scale it, but we're also going to be looking at a holistic approach to it. So they'll also be given healthcare, given childcare, given that leadership to ensure that they can actually scale their business. So Suraj and I are working on that now.
That sounds amazing.
It's
And
really exciting.
please, Suraj.
Oh, no, sorry, I'm just saying it's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And how did you get connected with the foundation in Egypt, or how did that sort of come about?
That's all Suraj on the Rogue side.
Yeah, sure. It was actually quite a funny story. So we invested in a company based in Toronto that has since done unbelievable things. They've raised a Series C. They've really, really grown like crazy, gotten a lot of media attention. And as soon as we invested, the founder said, there's someone on my board that invested in us early. I want you to meet him. And next time he's in Toronto, he's from Egypt. You and your sister should sit down with him. And he didn't say anything else. And as soon as we sat down with him, we knew exactly why he introduced us, because it's a family company and foundation based out of Egypt, and very similar ideals and sort of core principles with Reetu and I. Multi-generational, really, really a core kind of tenet on giving back, really interested in entrepreneurship in a lot of different forms. Family company started in one industry, which was telecom, and sort of branched out into a lot of different things. So we had a really entertaining lunch or breakfast with him that day. And after that, actually, right before COVID hit, Reetu and I actually went to Egypt and visited him there, did some more research. We visited their offices, and Reetu asked a lot of questions about, okay, how can we work with you? How can we sort of do more work, through the foundation? And Karen, going back to your earlier point on trust-based philanthropy, Reetu was really passionate about the idea of giving back to Egypt and wanting to do something in that country. So knowing we knew someone that was one of the most influential businesses in that country and one of the most well-known foundations in that country, it was kind of the perfect sort of partnership. But yeah, it was very lucky how it came about.
Can I tell a story about this, Karen?
Please,
You were talking before about the difficulties that we face. So something that was interesting, and this might just be a South Asian thing, I don't know. When we decided to do this project in Egypt, and I went to my parents, because as much as Suraj and I are co-chairs and we can make all the decisions, obviously we still have respect for our parents. So we went to them and said, okay, I would like to do this project in Egypt. And I told them how I want to fund it. We were actually selling a hotel that time. And I had said, okay, from this hotel, I would like proceeds. I would like us to donate, and I would like the proceeds to go to Egypt. And my parents were for it, but they also kind of said, but why Egypt, not India? And I thought it was interesting because all of their work was always based in India. And of course, that's their home country. And for me, my immediate thought was, well, the whole world needs help, and we are still always going to help India, but I also want to help Canada. I also want to help Egypt and help other countries in Africa. But it was interesting because for me, it was also a generational thing where they thought, okay, well, and they're right. They came from India and they came to this country. They want to make sure that they have ties and that they help. And then I come along and kind of, broke that all apart. But it was just an interesting conversation. And you had mentioned this, the trials that you kind of go through. So it was I didn't foresee that. I didn't realize that my parents would look at it and say, why are you doing in Egypt? Just do this same thing in India. But it's also not that easy to do, if that makes sense. So it was just an interesting kind of pressure point to have in this process.
Sure. And I think that's typical of many families, right? I think that, family dynamics can be difficult, and sort of navigating where your passions are versus your parents' passions can sometimes be a delicate conversation. So let's go back to Rogue for a minute, Suraj. So tell me, what is the biggest success to date of Rogue?
Oh, that's such a great question. So we are very lucky that a lot of our investments have gone very well. And I think what I would say is the biggest proof of success for Rogue is a couple things. One, in 2017, people were not really investing in impact-driven companies as they are now. And that needle on diversity has also moved. It hasn't moved as far as I'd like, but it's moved. So I think one thing that I would say we're really excited about is the fact that you're seeing a lot more VCs launch saying we have a specific impact focus. We're specifically focused on diversity, on companies that are making a difference. That's one thing. Another thing that's actually really interesting is I think we were one of the first kind of real estate development families that branched into venture capital and private equity. And we're starting to see a lot more real estate developers in Canada do that as well, with a bit of that impact focus. But probably the thing I'm most excited about in the metric I would give is that typically in venture capital, they say if your success ratio is 10 to 25% of your investments, right? If those are the ones that are doing well, you have a very, very good return. And if the rest fail or go to zero, you're still doing pretty well because, you're doing excellent on those 1 to 3 investments out of 10. But for us, 90% of our investments, 95% of our investments are either marked up or still operating. And we've only had a very small number that have failed. And those ones are some of our smallest check sizes. So I think for us, that's sort of the biggest proof point so far is, we've gone through COVID, we're now going through some insane inflationary year. And despite all the market challenges of the last 5 years, our companies are still really persevering and doing really well. And I think it's just a great proof point of the fact that when you invest in diversity, when you invest in impact, that becomes sustainable in itself, and that becomes very resilient. I think a lot more so than other companies.
Right. And I think we do see that, right? We see that companies that are rate higher on their ESG scores tend to do better, right? And we also see that those types of companies are the types of companies that people want to work for as well, right? Especially with the younger generation. I mean, I feel like philanthropy for younger people, the way that they view it is much broader than the older generation. It's not necessarily just about time, treasure, and talent. It's also about lifestyle choices. How do I invest? Where do I work? Where do I shop? Right? I do think that philanthropy as sort of a term or a concept is definitely broadening. And I love the fact that the companies that you're investing in still have such a wonderful track record. So that's really great to see.
Definitely, yeah.